Let's talk about boundaries. Not walls, not silence, not passive-aggressive social media posts. Real, clear, soul-honoring boundaries. Because here's the truth. People will treat you how you let them. And I know that sentence stings a little. It sounds like blame, but it's not. It's ownership. It's agency. It's the radical act of saying, I'm not a doormat. I'm not an open door. I'm a whole human being worthy of respect. Every time we don't speak up, every time we tolerate disrespect, every time we shrink ourselves to keep the peace, we are teaching people how to treat us. And listen, I get it. We were raised to believe that being nice is more important than being honest. That if we rock the boat, we'll end up alone. That keeping quiet keeps the love. But peace without truth isn't peace. It's just silence with a smile. We have to relearn this. Setting boundaries isn't about being mean. It's about being clear. Clarity is kind. Vagueness is cruel. Confusion is exhausting. But when we say, this is okay and this is not, we're not pushing people away. We're giving them the gift of clarity. You're not here to be tolerated. You're here to be valued. You're not here to carry everyone's comfort at the expense of your own worth. So here's the challenge. Speak up. Stand firm. Let your no be as powerful as your yes. When someone crosses a line, name it. When you feel dismissed, say it. When your body tenses and your chest tightens, that's your wisdom speaking. Listen to it. The people who belong in your life will rise to meet your boundaries. The ones who don't, they were never holding space for your full self anyway. You don't have to earn basic respect. You don't have to explain your limits. You don't need permission to be treated with dignity, because how people treat you starts with how you teach them to. And when you stop shrinking, they either learn to grow or they fall away. Either way, you rise. Let's start with something hard but honest. We are always teaching people how to treat us. Whether we realize it or not, our actions, our silences, our reactions, and our agreements and our non-negotiables, they all become blueprints for how people show up in our lives. And most of us weren't taught this. We were taught to be likable, to be agreeable, to not make waves. So we learned how to tolerate, to absorb, to smile through discomfort, thinking we're being strong. But what we're actually doing is training people that we're okay with crumbs when our soul is starving for the whole meal. Here's what I know after 2 decades of research and stories. When we don't set boundaries, we abandon ourselves. And when we abandon ourselves enough times, we start to believe that's all we're worth. We fall into relationships, friendships, jobs where our needs are dismissed or minimized, and instead of calling that out, we double down on self-sacrifice. We tell ourselves, if I just give more, maybe they'll value me more. But that's not how it works. Love and respect aren't handed out as rewards for endurance. They're foundational. And when they're not there, no amount of people-pleasing will build them. Now, I want to be clear. Setting boundaries is not about controlling other people. It's not about giving ultimatums or demanding compliance. It's about being in integrity with yourself. It's about saying, this is what I will and will not allow in my life. It's about protecting your energy, your peace, and your emotional safety. When you set a boundary, you're not forcing anyone to change. You're just showing them the conditions under which they get access to you. That's not selfish. That's sacred. And yet, so many of us struggle with this. Why? Because we think being liked is the same as being loved. We think saying no will make people leave. We think standing up for ourselves is the same as being difficult. And let me tell you something that's uncomfortable but true. When you start to stand tall, some people will walk away. And that's exactly what's supposed to happen. You're not here to contort your spirit into someone else's mold. You're here to live fully and freely. And that means creating relationships where mutual respect isn't optional, it's required. What I've seen over and over again is this: the people who genuinely care about you will rise to your boundaries. They may not get it at first. They might push back. But healthy people adjust. They listen. They lean in. They say, "Thank you for telling me." And the people who don't, they'll blame you. They'll call you cold or dramatic or too much. But let me ask you, what's more dramatic? Someone calmly saying, "This doesn't work for me," or someone expecting you to sacrifice your well-being just to make them comfortable? Every time you speak a boundary, you are reclaiming your power, and not the loud, forceful kind. I'm talking about quiet, grounded power. The kind that says, "I know who I am, I know what I deserve, and I'm no longer available for anything less." That's not arrogance. That's self-respect. That's alignment. That's choosing truth over approval. And I promise you this, there is nothing more magnetic than someone who knows their worth and lives like it. So yes, people will treat you how you let them. That's not about blaming yourself for others' bad behavior. It's about realizing you have agency. You can't control how someone acts, but you can control whether or not they get to stay in your life. That's a powerful shift. It moves you out of the victim seat and into the driver's seat. It doesn't mean you won't be hurt or disappointed. It just means you'll stop handing out free passes to people who keep showing you who they are. You'll start responding instead of reacting. You'll start choosing alignment over attachment. And that changes everything. This is the work. This is the heart of the matter. Boundaries are how you teach the world how to love you. They are not fences to keep people out. They are bridges that show others the safest, clearest way to connect with you. And when those boundaries are honored, you get to experience something most of us have been chasing our entire lives: belonging without betrayal. And you don't have to earn it. You just have to claim it. We have been deeply conditioned to believe that setting boundaries makes us harsh, that drawing a line makes us selfish, that saying no without an apology makes us cold or ungrateful. And this idea, it's one of the biggest lies we've been sold. Because the truth is, boundaries are the birthplace of real kindness, not politeness, not performative niceness, but deep, anchored, integrity-filled kindness. And at the heart of that, clarity. When we are clear with others, we are not punishing them, we are loving them enough to tell them the truth. Clarity is kindness. Let that sit for a second. When you tell someone what you need, where your limits are, what you're available for and what you're not, you are removing the confusion. You are removing the guessing. You're saying, here's how to love me well. Here's how I can show up best in this relationship. And while it might feel awkward at first, while it might shake up some dynamics, that clarity builds trust, because nothing erodes connection faster than unspoken expectations and silent resentments. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard. Stories about people trying to hold the peace by staying quiet, by tolerating behavior that hurts, by constantly managing everyone else's emotions except their own. But the cost of that kind of people-pleasing is enormous. When we avoid setting boundaries to keep others comfortable, we often end up betraying ourselves. And not just once, over and over until we wake up and realize we're deeply resentful and emotionally exhausted. That's not kindness. That's quiet desperation. That's a slow erosion of self. What's far more compassionate, far more connective, is a kind of courage that says, I value you enough to be honest with you. That's what boundary setting really is. It's about respect. For yourself, yes, but also for the relationship. You don't set a boundary to punish someone. You set it to preserve connection. Because relationships without boundaries aren't safe. They're full of walking on eggshells, unmet needs, unspoken pain. And that's where bitterness and disconnection grow. It's interesting, when people think of kindness, they usually think of softness. But I found that the kindest people I know are the clearest. They are people who will look you in the eye and say the hard thing with love, who will say, this doesn't feel okay to me, not to shame you, but to preserve what's sacred between you. That's the paradox. It's not kind to smile through something that's wounding you. It's not kind to ghost someone instead of having a brave conversation. It's not kind to say yes with your mouth while screaming no in your body. Clarity is what allows kindness to actually land. And yes, clarity will sometimes cost you. When you start to live in a way that's honest and boundary-driven, people who benefited from your silence will notice. People who were used to you always saying yes will feel the shift. Some might call you difficult. Some might back away. But here's the thing, you are not required to carry the burden of their discomfort. Your job isn't to keep everyone happy. It's to live in alignment with your truth. And people who are capable of real intimacy, real mutual respect, they'll not only survive your boundaries, they'll appreciate them. We have to stop confusing kindness with compliance. Kindness without clarity is manipulation in disguise, because it's often driven by fear, not love. It's driven by, I'll do what you want so you don't get upset, instead of, I'll tell you the truth because I care about this relationship. And the second one, that's love. That's maturity. That's how we build relationships that can hold weight, not flimsy connections built on pleasing, but real, rooted, resilient ones built on truth. Here's the tough love truth we often don't want to hear. You are not responsible for other people's comfort, especially when it comes at the cost of your own self-worth. But many of us grew up in systems, families, workplaces, or cultures where we were trained explicitly or subtly to make sure everyone else was okay, even if we weren't. And the problem with that? Over time, we begin to equate other people's ease with our value. We believe if everyone else is comfortable with us, that means we're doing something right. But that's not self-worth. That's self-abandonment dressed up as virtue. When we make ourselves small so others can stay unchallenged, when we avoid being honest to keep the peace, when we let someone cross a boundary just to avoid an awkward moment, we are sending ourselves a dangerous message. Your truth doesn't matter as much as their comfort. And the more we do it, the more it becomes a habit, a pattern, a way of surviving. But survival isn't the same as living. And one day, you wake up and realize the life you're living was built for someone else's needs, not yours. Let me be very clear. Your job is not to protect other people from your truth. It is not your job to shrink, soften, sugarcoat, or dim who you are so someone else doesn't have to stretch, grow, or take accountability. And no, I'm not talking about being reckless with your words or lacking compassion. I'm talking about the deep, soulful work of honoring yourself, even when it makes someone else uncomfortable. Because their comfort cannot be the compass you use to navigate your worth. Now here's where it gets really tender. When we've spent a lifetime centering other people's feelings, we often feel guilty the first time we prioritize ourselves. That guilt isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something new. It's the ache of unlearning. But I promise you, your worth was never meant to be transactional. It's not something you earn by playing it safe or being pleasing. It's something you claim by being honest, by being whole, by being fully, unapologetically yourself. And here's the wild part. The more you prioritize your self-worth over someone else's momentary comfort, the more you build relationships that can handle the real you. You stop attracting people who only like the version of you that stays small. You stop performing and start connecting. You stop managing and start belonging, because true belonging doesn't require you to be less. It requires you to be real. And when you're real, when you're rooted in your own value, something beautiful happens. You stop negotiating your worth in spaces that can't afford you. That shift changes everything. When you know your worth, you don't entertain disrespect. You don't rationalize poor treatment. You don't keep people around just because they're comfortable with a version of you that no longer exists. Instead, you start choosing yourself, not in a selfish, cut everyone off kind of way, but in a sacred, soul-honoring way. You realize that your job is to live in alignment, not in approval. You realize that your integrity is more important than someone's temporary ease. And yes, people might feel challenged by the version of you that no longer puts their comfort above your truth, but that's not your burden to carry. That's their growth edge to confront. You can be loving and still firm, compassionate and still boundaried. You can care deeply and still say, this no longer works for me. Because your self-worth is not a group project. It is yours. And the moment you take full responsibility for it, everything shifts. We live in a culture that often mistakes silence for strength. We've been taught that if we can just hold it in, if we can stay quiet, if we can let it go without saying anything, we're being mature. We're keeping the peace. But what we're really doing, we're disappearing. We're disappearing from the rooms we walk into, from the relationships we're in, from our own sense of self. Because here's the truth, that most of us don't learn until we're already hurting. Silence doesn't protect peace, it protects dysfunction. When you choose silence in the face of disrespect, pain, or boundary violations, you're not preserving harmony. You're preserving the illusion of harmony. And that illusion comes at a high cost, your identity. Because when you choose not to speak your truth to avoid discomfort, what you're actually doing is teaching yourself and everyone around you that your voice doesn't matter, that your needs are negotiable, that your presence is conditional. Over time, you stop showing up as you and start showing up as the version of you who won't cause a stir. And that's not peace. That's quiet erasure. There's a moment, often unspoken but deeply felt, when you realize that your silence hasn't kept the peace. It's just kept you stuck. Stuck in relationships where your needs go unmet. It's stuck in jobs where you're overlooked. Stuck in conversations where you have so much to say but don't. And the pain of that silence eventually becomes louder than the fear of speaking up. That's usually when something shifts. When you finally say, I can't keep going like this. And that moment That's the beginning of reclaiming your voice. And listen, I know why we stay silent. It's not because we're weak. It's because we've been told, sometimes directly, sometimes subtly, that speaking up makes us difficult. That truth-telling disrupts. That asking for what we need is too much. So we internalize this idea that we're easier to love if we're quiet, if we don't complain, if we go with the flow. But here's what I need you to hear. You were not born to be easy for other people to manage. You were born to be real, to be whole, to be fully human. And that includes having a voice. When you speak your truth, it might shake things. It might make some people uncomfortable. But discomfort is not the same as danger. And peace that requires you to betray yourself is not peace, it's performance. Real peace, the kind that's built on honesty and mutual respect, can only exist when people know where you stand, when they know what matters to you, when they know who you really are. Silence keeps you safe in the short term, but truth builds safety in the long term. It's what sustainable connection is made of. And here's something I've seen in every kind of relationship, from family to friendship to leadership. When you consistently stay silent, people start to believe that your silence is consent, that your tolerance means comfort, that your quiet means agreement. And then one day when you finally speak, they're shocked. Not because your truth is unreasonable, but because your silence was so consistent, they assumed you were okay. That's why it's so important to practice truth in real time. Not because you owe people an explanation, but because you owe yourself the experience of being seen. You deserve to be known, not the curated, quiet, accommodating version of you, but the real one, the one with edges and preferences and convictions. Silence might keep things smooth, but it will never make you feel seen. And being seen, really seen, is one of the deepest human needs we have. So the next time you find yourself swallowing your truth to keep someone else comfortable, ask yourself, am I choosing peace or invisibility? Because your voice matters. Your boundaries matter. And peace without you in it isn't peace at all. We live in a culture that often mistakes silence for strength. We've been taught that if we can just hold it in, if we can stay quiet, if we can let it go without saying anything, we're being mature. We're keeping the peace. But what we're really doing, we're disappearing. We're disappearing from the rooms we walk into, from the relationships we're in, from our own sense of self. Because here's the truth that most of us don't learn until we're already hurting. Silence doesn't protect peace. It protects dysfunction. When you choose silence in the face of disrespect, pain, or boundary violations, you're not preserving harmony. You're preserving the illusion of harmony. And that illusion comes at a high cost, your identity. Because when you choose not to speak your truth to avoid discomfort, what you're actually doing is teaching yourself and everyone around you that your voice doesn't matter, that your needs are negotiable, that your presence is conditional. Over time, you stop showing up as you and start showing up as the version of you who won't cause a stir. And that's not peace. That's quiet erasure. There's a moment, often unspoken but deeply felt, when you realize that your silence hasn't kept the peace. It's just kept you stuck. Stuck in relationships where your needs go unmet. Stuck in jobs where you're overlooked. Stuck in conversations where you have so much to say but don't. And the pain of that silence eventually becomes louder than the fear of speaking up. That's usually when something shifts. When you finally say, I can't keep going like this. And that moment, that's the beginning of reclaiming your voice. And listen, I know why we stay silent. It's not because we're weak. It's because we've been told, sometimes directly, sometimes subtly, that speaking up makes us difficult, that truth-telling disrupts, that asking for what we need is too much. So we internalize this idea that we're easier to love if we're quiet, if we don't complain, if we go with the flow. But here's what I need you to hear. You were not born to be easy for other people to manage. You were born to be real, to be whole, to be fully human. And that includes having a voice. When you speak your truth, it might shake things. It might make some people uncomfortable. But discomfort is not the same as danger. And peace that requires you to betray yourself is not peace. It's performance. Real peace, the kind that's built on honesty and mutual respect, can only exist when people know where you stand, when they know what matters to you, when they know who you really are. Silence keeps you safe in the short term, but truth builds safety in the long term. It's what sustainable connection is made of. And here's something I've seen in every kind of relationship, from family to friendship to leadership. When you consistently stay silent, people start to believe that your silence is consent, that your tolerance means comfort, that your quiet means agreement. And then one day when you finally speak, they're shocked. Not because your truth is unreasonable, but because your silence was so consistent, they assumed you were okay. That's why it's so important to practice truth in real time. Not because you owe people an explanation, but because you owe yourself the experience of being seen. You deserve to be known. Not the curated, quiet, accommodating version of you, but the real one. The one with edges and preferences and convictions. Silence might keep things smooth, but it will never make you feel seen. And being seen, really seen, is one of the deepest human needs we have. So the next time you find yourself swallowing your truth to keep someone else comfortable, ask yourself, am I choosing peace or invisibility? Because your voice matters, your boundaries matter, and peace without you in it isn't peace at all. Let me say this right off the bat because someone out there needs to hear it. You are not too much. You are not too sensitive. You are not needy or broken or impossible. What you are is a human being asking for connection, safety, respect, and consistency. That is not too much. That's the baseline. The problem is not that you're asking for too much. The problem is that some people have been offering too little for so long. They've convinced you that healthy love is unrealistic. But let's be clear, you are not hard to love. You're just asking for a version of love that's real. Somewhere along the way, a lot of us were made to feel like our needs were an inconvenience. Maybe you were labeled dramatic for having emotions. Maybe you were told you were high maintenance for expecting clarity. Maybe you were dismissed or ignored when you tried to express hurt. So you learned to make yourself small. You learned to ask for less, to expect less, to tolerate more. But that's not love. That's survival. And we were not put on this earth just to survive relationships. We are here to thrive in them. Real love, healthy love, isn't afraid of your truth. It doesn't back away when you need reassurance. It doesn't punish you for asking questions or needing a boundary. Healthy love says, let's figure this out together. It's flexible, not fragile. It's willing to have uncomfortable conversations. It's willing to grow. If someone makes you feel like your standards are the problem, hear me when I say this. It's not that your standards are too high. It's that their effort is too low, and it is not your job to shrink just so they can stay. We have to stop internalizing rejection as proof that we are unlovable. Sometimes rejection is just redirection away from people who were never equipped to meet you where you are. People will call you too much when what they really mean is you require more than I'm willing to give. That's not your fault. That's not your shame to carry, because love that asks you to abandon yourself is not love, it's codependency. And love that grows through honesty and mutual respect, that's where safety lives. That's where intimacy thrives. Now, does this mean you'll always get what you need from others just because you ask? No. But that's the beauty of boundaries. When you're clear about your needs, you get to observe how people respond, and in their response, you get clarity. Not everyone is your person. Not everyone has the capacity, and that's okay. That's information. But you don't contort yourself just to fit their capacity. You bless them, you release them, and you continue showing up in your wholeness, because love should never feel like a performance. And yes, there will be people who rise, people who say, I see you, I hear you, let's keep growing. That's who you're making space for when you stop settling. That's who you're creating room for when you stop negotiating your worth. Love isn't about perfection. It's about effort. It's about showing up even when it's hard. And when someone is willing to meet you in the hard places, that's where healing happens. That's where transformation begins. Not because they complete you, but because they meet you where you already know your value. So no, you are not difficult. You are not unlovable. You are not asking for too much. You are asking for presence, for honesty, for depth, for consistency. And those things are not luxuries. They are not extras. They are the heartbeat of meaningful connection. If someone tells you that you're asking for too much, they are simply telling you what they are not ready for. Don't let that shake your knowing. Don't let it make you small. You are not hard to love. You are just learning to stop settling for anything less than real. Let's start with this. You are the thermostat of your life, not the thermometer. You don't just reflect the emotional climate around you, you set it. But most of us were never taught that. We were taught to tolerate, to endure, to get through things with a smile. And somewhere along the way, tolerating became a habit. Not because we're weak, but because we learned that staying silent was safer than speaking up. That putting up with discomfort was more acceptable than being difficult. But here's the hard truth. What you tolerate doesn't just reflect what's happening around you. It creates the environment you live in. Think of your life like a room. If you tolerate people who speak to you with disrespect, that becomes the standard air quality in that room. If you tolerate emotional distance, inconsistency, or manipulation, that's the temperature you'll adapt to. And over time, you start thinking, well, I guess this is just how things are. But just because you've adapted to dysfunction doesn't mean it's healthy. You can get used to anything, including pain, and that's where we start confusing numbness for peace. That's when we start losing sight of what we deserve. Tolerating is different from accepting. Acceptance is active, conscious, and rooted in choice. Tolerance, especially the kind that wears you down, is often passive. It's about enduring what we don't believe we can change, but you are not powerless here. You get to decide what's okay and what isn't. You get to raise the standard. You get to recalibrate the temperature of your life by choosing what you will no longer normalize. And that decision, that's where the shift begins. Because boundaries are not about controlling others. They're about teaching others how to treat you and reminding yourself how worthy you are. Let's be honest. Sometimes we tolerate things because it's easier in the moment. It's less confrontational to stay quiet than to speak up. Less risky to stay in the relationship than to leave. Less vulnerable to say it's fine than to admit you're hurt. But over time, that ease becomes heaviness. That comfort zone becomes a cage. And we look around and wonder, why am I so tired? Why do I feel so disconnected? It's because you've been managing the emotional climate of a room you didn't design, and it's suffocating your soul. But here's the beauty of this truth. The moment you decide to stop tolerating what drains you, you start reclaiming your power. You start showing up differently, and the world around you begins to shift. Maybe not overnight, maybe not without resistance, but it shifts because when you change your standard, you change your story. When you raise the bar, some people will fall away, and that's okay. You're not losing love. You're making space for real love, for aligned connections, for honest, breathable air. And don't mistake this for perfectionism. This isn't about never getting hurt again. This isn't about building walls. It's about saying, I get to decide what energy I allow in my space. It's about looking at a pattern and saying, no more. It's about looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, I will no longer call this normal. Because you teach the world how to treat you not just by what you say, but by what you continue to allow. And when you stop tolerating what's harmful, you start attracting what's healing. You don't have to burn your life down to change it. You just have to get honest about what you've been settling for. You just have to stop explaining away mistreatment. Stop minimizing your discomfort. Stop calling it not that bad when your body and your spirit are screaming otherwise. You don't owe anyone your silence. You owe yourself your wholeness. And the moment you decide to stop adapting to a room that's too cold, too chaotic, or too cruel, that's the moment you start building a life that actually feels like home. So here's what I want you to remember. You teach people how to treat you by what you allow, by what you speak up for, and by how deeply you believe in your own worth. You are not here to be easy. You are here to be true. You are not here to keep the peace if it costs you your power. You are here to stand in your values, your voice, and your wholeness. Let them call you intense. Let them say you've changed. Let them feel the edges of your boundaries and the weight of your standards. Because the people who truly love you, the people who see you, will not be intimidated by your growth. They'll rise with it. They'll honor it. They'll match it. The moment you stop shrinking to fit into rooms you've outgrown, something extraordinary happens. You begin to build a life that reflects who you truly are, not who you had to become to survive. You start choosing peace over pleasing, alignment over acceptance, truth over comfort. And yes, it's messy. Yes, it's vulnerable. Yes, it will ask everything of you, but it will also give you everything you've been longing for: freedom, clarity, connection, and the kind of love that doesn't require you to disappear in order to belong. You don't owe anyone the watered-down version of you. You owe yourself the real you. And that, my friend, is how you change the temperature of your life. Not by force, not by fear, but by finally deciding they will treat me how I let them, and I am done letting them treat me like I'm not enough, because I am. And so are you.